Join me today as I show you how I built this set of modular graveyard terrain pieces. I started with the walls, and to start the walls I started with a bunch of tiny bricks. I then cut a piece of cardboard that is roughly the thickness of half a brick, and then to the length of as far as you want your wall to go. I then use hot glue to start piecing the bricks on. This means that you use less bricks and less foam overall, however, it can be a bit tedious. Once the first layer is secure with some hot glue, I then use PVA glue for the next couple of layers. This is just a bit stronger setting. I make a handful of these, and once they're dry, they're pretty strong. And then on the top of the little wall, once it reaches the chest height of a miniature, I'm just going to add a slab of brick. And this is the same thickness as all of the tiny bricks below, but it's just one big piece, and we'll carve the brick texture into it. And I just use the inch marks on my little cutting mat to mark where each individual brick is going to lay. I then go over it with the knife and then deepen the grooves with a pencil. And then finally, to give it a more rocky look, I just roll some aluminium over the top of it. For the little pillars, I just cut several pieces of foam. This is using a hot wire cutter, but if you're really careful with a knife, you can get some nice cuts like this as well. And I just cut pieces that are 3 inches tall, and then the pieces at the bottom are just a couple of centimeters wider than the main body of the column. And of course, once they're all put together, you need to hit it with some aluminium foil to give it that stony, rocky texture again. Because of the 2 little pieces at the bottom of the column, the entire thing is now a bit too high. So I cut another thin piece of foam and place that along the bottom of the entire piece. For making the fences posts to go in between these columns, I grab a bunch of barbecue skewers. I end up going with 12 barbecue skewers because there is a 13 centimeter gap in between each column. So that means I can put 1 skewer every 1 centimeter. Once I'm happy with how they look, I start cutting them out. 3 inches and 2.5 inches is what I use for these, and I just alternate between the 2 lengths. And this gives a little bit more detail. For securing the skewers in place, I cut 2 lengths of foam that are about 1/2 centimeter thick. I then lightly drill a hole every centimeter, and that's where the skewers will go. I make these holes slightly smaller than the thickness of the skewers. That way, when the skewers push in, they don't break the foam, but they're also held in place by friction. I then secure every skewer inside and then stick it on with some hot glue. In addition, I add some caps to the sides of the columns just to make it look a bit more interesting. I then also 3D print some spikes to go on the top as well. And now it's time for the actual graveyard. I got a bunch of these tombstones that I 3D printed, and I just got these off Thingiverse. I then cut a piece of plastic, flat packaging plastic, to serve as the ground. Now this is better than MDF or cardboard because it will be flush with the ground and won't have a little indent. However, you do need to sand it down as things do not want to glue to it, so make sure to give it a good sanding. I then cut some small pieces of foam in a bit of a haphazard pattern to act like flagstones that would be on a path in a graveyard. I secure everything down with some hot glue. However, some of the graves do start coming off, so I just give them a bit of a sand along the bottom and they tend to stick on pretty well. Once we get some flocking down and some PVA glue, they do not want to budge. Speaking of flocking and PVA glue, I cover all of the raw plastic with some PVA glue and try to get in between some of the bricks as well. And then I just dump on my mixed ground cover, which is a bunch of different coverings from sand to bicarb soda, some tea, just all the leftover things fall in this bucket. Once they are dry, it is super important to give it a coat of a black PVA or Mod Podge, anything, some sort of glue over the top to secure in all of the sand and dirt that you put down. This will also serve as a good layer to start painting it. And while I got the Mod Podge out, I might as well cover the other pieces of foam as well. I then remember about the most important part of the graveyard, the spooky entrance. So I use some circle things, I only really use the Milo tin, to make this archway shape. And then I just continue tracing it out and kind of freehand an archway to act as a template. I'll then transfer this to some foam and cut it out. I'm going to use similar columns to the walls, so I need to make sure the piece of foam is roughly the same thickness as that as well. And I just trace around with the Stanley knife to cut it to shape. Now this really works well because it is stone and it's kind of ruined and old. So you can kind of use a knife and get in there and get it messy and dirty, because when you texture it with the foam, it'll just add to that old and ruined texture. Once all the pieces of foam are textured, I just cut a little lip out of the top of the pillar so that way it can fit around the edge of this piece of stonework that I've carved out. And I'm really happy with how this came out. It was a bit weak at the beginning and some pieces broke off, but I just stuck it together with some hot glue and it's now sticking together pretty well, especially after a layer of Mod Podge. I then add a skull to the top of the archway because I feel like this graveyard was lacking skulls. For the two doors, I don't really want to worry about it moving, and I don't want them to be big enough to stop a miniature from walking through or blocking line of sight. So I just make them much smaller than they actually would be to fit in and just chalk that up to them being ruined. So I just make them 5 centimeters long here and cut them to fit into place. And this is made just like I made the walls. I further the embellishments with some spikes as well. Much smaller spikes than are on the fences. I then give that gate a coat of black Mod Podge as well, and we're all caught up. Once the black Mod Podge has dried on all of the foam pieces, I give it a zenithal spray, a really really 99% coverage in a grey primer, and then cover that in a black-brown wash. I then cover all of the metallic pieces in a 50-50 mix of black and silver paint. And then I come through later on and give it a bit of a highlight by just dry brushing on some gunmetal. And gunmetal is the highlight here. So this is very dark. I then use some dark green flock that is just made of sawdust and mix it with some PVA glue and stipple it on to look like moss. I lost a recording of painting the graveyard pieces, but I just used a reddish brown and then highlighted with a raw sienna, focusing on the pathway to make it look like worn stones and separate it from the grass or dirt underneath. For the tombstones, it was just a simple grey with the black wash. And now, for flocking it, as you see here, I cover them in some PVA glue and then come in with some chamomile tea and green tea, which look like some dead or dying grass. I added in this angel statue that I also 3D printed, and I think that is a pretty good start for a set of graveyard terrain pieces. But I feel like there might be a couple pretty important pieces that are missing. I'm really happy with how the chamomile tea and green tea came out. It looks really nice, like some dead grass. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week with something different. Or maybe something a bit familiar.